Moscow, May 1945, Joseph Stalin is awake inside the Kremlin, reading summaries brought in by exhausted aides and intelligence officers. The fighting in Berlin has barely stopped, and Soviet communications from the front are still chaotic. Reports mention a burned body, a bunker, and the claim that Adolf Hitler is dead. Stalin does not celebrate. He does not even react outwardly. He asks for confirmation, then orders more reports, more names, more evidence. For Stalin, rumors are not information. He has spent decades watching men lie to survive, exaggerate to impress, or hide failure to avoid punishment. He understands the end of a war can be as dangerous as its peak. A false report could pull the Soviet Union into a trap or allow surviving Nazi leaders to reposition. In his mind, Hitler dying too cleanly, too quickly, is itself a reason to doubt it. In Berlin, Soviet soldiers and officers are moving through ruins that still contain pockets of resistance. The Reich Chancellery complex and the Führer bunker have been smashed by artillery and burned by close fighting. The Red Army has taken the city, but the ground is crowded with bodies that cannot be identified. The danger is immediate and physical. Booby traps, snipers, collapsing basements, fires that reignite. Even with Berlin captured, control is incomplete. Stalin's first strategic instinct is not closure, it is control of the conclusion. He pushes the NKVD to secure witnesses and documents before the story is shaped by anyone else. In Soviet thinking, the first version of an event becomes the foundation for every political decision afterward. Stalin has no intention of letting the Western Allies announce victory terms while the Soviet Union is still counting its dead. The first answers coming back from Berlin are conflicting. Some Soviet personnel report that Hitler stayed in the bunker until the final hours. Others say he escaped. The burned remains found near the bunker are not immediately identifiable. Stalin refuses to sign off on the idea that Hitler is gone based on battlefield guesses. Hitler has misled enemies and allies for years, and the Third Reich has used deception as routine practice. Stalin treats the question of Hitler's fate as an intelligence operation, not a headline. This is also personal. Stalin's war has been total. The German invasion of the Soviet Union has killed millions of soldiers and civilians. Entire regions have been destroyed. Stalin knows that many Soviet citizens will demand a clear, visible ending, the enemy leader dead and proven dead. But Stalin also knows that an unverified claim could make him look reckless or weak. He does not fear Hitler's charisma anymore. He fears uncertainty and what uncertainty allows. At this moment, Stalin does what he has always done under pressure. He narrows the problem into a sequence of tasks. Find the bunker, find the chain of command, find the bodies, match dental records, identify the witnesses. Stalin expects his intelligence organs to work with the same discipline that artillery units use to reduce a building, methodically, without emotion, until there is nothing left standing. What if Stalin accepts the report too early and Hitler's death turns out to be a deception that breaks Soviet leverage at the exact moment the war's ending is being negotiated? Stalin orders silence and verification. Until he can hold certainty in his hands, the war is not finished. In Moscow, dawn approaches, and inside the Kremlin, the question remains open, not as a mystery, but as a problem that must be closed by force. Inside the Führer bunker, Adolf Hitler's world shrinks to concrete walls, stale air, and a map table that no longer describes reality. Soviet artillery has turned the government quarter into rubble. Radio messages from the front are delayed, incomplete, or simply dishonest. Orders still leave the bunker, but they are no longer connected to forces that can obey them. Hitler's command style, built on absolute control and imagined last-minute reversals, now produces only paralysis and rage. The Nazi leadership around him is already separating into factions. Martin Bormann stays close, watching every exchange, controlling access and trying to secure his place in whatever comes next. Bormann's power has always depended on proximity. Now, proximity is a trap. He can see that the regime is dying in the same corridors where it is still pretending to live. He pushes paperwork, witnesses' signatures, and tries to preserve authority by managing the final record. Above ground, Berlin is a battlefield of collapse. Soviet infantry advances building by building. German units include exhausted regular soldiers, teenagers pulled from the Hitler Youth, and scattered remnants of the army. Civilians crowd cellars and tunnels, surviving on limited water and whatever food remains. Many have no clear information and no safe direction to move. Tactical reality decides everything. Streets blocked by rubble, bridges destroyed, and fires that make entire blocks uninhabitable. The fighting is not heroic. It is close range and punitive. Hitler's misjudgment at this stage is not only military, it is psychological. He still believes his will can replace logistics. He demands counterattacks from units that no longer exist, and he punishes officers for retreating from impossible positions. In the last weeks, his leadership became a series of demands for proof that loyalty still has meaning. The result is wasted lives and lost time. By late April 1945, no operational plan could save Berlin. The only remaining decisions are about surrender, suicide, or escape. Heinrich Himmler, far from the bunker's core, makes his own calculation. The leader of the SS understands that Germany is finished, but he also believes he can survive it. He explores contact with the Western Allies, hoping to negotiate a partial surrender or a deal that preserves his relevance. It is a strategic mistake built on delusion. Himmler underestimates how thoroughly his name is linked to mass murder and terror. He also misreads the Allied position. Germany's defeat must be unconditional, and figures like him are not bargaining pieces, they are liabilities. When Hitler learns that Himmler has tried to negotiate, he sees it as betrayal. The regime's internal logic has always required enemies, and now it turns inward. Loyalty becomes the last currency, and even that currency is collapsing. In the bunker, men begin to understand that survival will depend on separating themselves from Hitler's final decisions, but they are trapped by proximity and fear. As Soviet forces close in, Hitler makes preparations for a final act that fits his worldview. No surrender, no captivity, no public humiliation. For those still near him, the most immediate reality is that the German state is dissolving in real time. The end is not announced. It is measured in missing units, broken telephones, and fewer footsteps in the corridors. If Hitler had chosen surrender instead of suicide, would Bormann have been able to control the transfer of power long enough to change who the Allies captured first? The final hours become administrative and desperate at the same time. Documents are gathered, messages are drafted, orders are issued into the void. Outside, Soviet troops continue to press forward, unaware of the exact moment when the man they have been hunting for years is nearing the end. The war is closing in on a single underground room, and the regime's last energy is spent not on defense, but on the struggle to manage blame. Soviet security personnel move into the Reich Chancellery grounds with a different mission than the frontline troops who fought to take it. The battlefield work is finished here. Now it has become an intelligence site. Guards seal off entrances and restrict who can enter and leave. Files are collected. Survivors are separated for questioning. The bunker complex, partially flooded and littered with debris, is searched in detail because Stalin has demanded certainty, not rumor. The first remains recovered near the bunker are badly burned and difficult to identify. There are multiple bodies, scattered and damaged by fire and explosions. Soviet investigators understand immediately that the physical condition of the remains will complicate everything, but they also understand the stakes. If they can prove Hitler is dead, they can control the single most important fact of the war's ending. This process is not quick. It involves medical examination and interrogation, but it also involves a disciplined chain of custody. Stalin's system is designed to limit improvisation. Investigators are expected to extract information, confirm it through independent means, and deliver it in a form that cannot be dismissed. The Soviet leadership has seen too many false claims, including earlier attempts by enemy commanders to use confusion to create openings. Witnesses are essential. People who lived inside the bunker's final days are questioned repeatedly, not just to hear their stories, but to test consistency. The details matter: the timing of movements, the sounds of gunshots, the smell of gasoline, the location where bodies were carried. Each piece of testimony is treated like a component in an engineering problem. The Soviet aim is not drama, it is a closure through verification. The strongest evidence comes through dental identification. Hitler's dental work is distinctive and extensive, and the remains include jaw fragments with teeth and bridges. Soviet investigators locate individuals from Hitler's dental staff and force them to describe his dental condition in detail. When the recovered remains match those descriptions, the case becomes operationally solid. This is the kind of proof Stalin values: technical, specific, hard to fake on short notice. The moment of confirmation reaches Moscow through official channels, filtered through layers of caution. Stalin does not allow himself to look relieved. He does not reward enthusiasm. He treats the verified death of Hitler not as a finishing line, but as a new problem that demands management. Hitler's disappearance from the board changes the structure of the post-war settlement. It changes how surrender is interpreted. It changes who speaks for Germany and how fast the Allies can shift from fighting to bargaining. Stalin also understands a cold political reality. Truth can be timed, shaped, and used. He has no incentive to give the Western Allies the satisfaction of a clean narrative. If he controls when and how Hitler's death is acknowledged, he controls a portion of the psychological ending of the war. He can harden Soviet prestige, justify Soviet occupation policy, and increase his leverage in negotiations that will determine Europe's future. This is where Stalin's thinking becomes historically decisive. He does not merely accept Hitler's death, he studies the advantages it creates. He has already decided that Eastern Europe cannot be left as a vacuum. The Red Army's losses have been extreme, and Stalin is determined that those losses will buy permanent security. With Hitler dead, Stalin can argue that Soviet forces must remain forward, not withdraw. He can portray any Western hesitation as softness and any Soviet demand as necessary defense. What if Stalin uses Hitler's confirmed death not as an ending, but as leverage to tighten Soviet control of Berlin before Allied access becomes irreversible? By the time Stalin fully accepts that Hitler is gone, the war in Europe is already shifting into a new contest. The shooting is slowing, but the struggle over territory, information, and political power is accelerating. Stalin has his proof. He has what he demands, and he immediately begins deciding how much of that proof the world is allowed to see. Joseph Stalin has proof in his possession, but he does not treat it as something to release for the sake of closure. He treats it as something to manage. In the weeks after Berlin falls, Soviet public statements remain guarded and sometimes contradictory. The Soviet state has confirmed Hitler's death internally, yet the outward message is slow, cautious, and occasionally suggestive that the body was not definitively identified. This is not confusion. It is a policy. Stalin's calculation is grounded in how wars end. Armies can stop shooting, but coalitions rarely remain stable once their common enemy disappears. Stalin knows the United States and Britain will soon stop needing Soviet sacrifice and start questioning Soviet control of Eastern Europe. By keeping uncertainty alive, he buys time and leverage. If the West cannot be sure what the Soviets know, they cannot easily shape the public narrative of victory without Moscow's participation. Winston Churchill watches these signals with growing suspicion. He has spent the war balancing cooperation with the Soviet Union against the fear of what Soviet power could become afterward. Now the Red Army sits across the center of Europe, controlling capitals and supply routes. Churchill's strategic concern is direct. Soviet influence is no longer theoretical. It is an occupying force. The question of Hitler's fate becomes one more point of friction, another indicator that Stalin will not share control of information. In the American command structure, Dwight D. Eisenhower is trying to hold the alliance together long enough to complete the final surrender arrangements. His operational priority is stability. He understands that a public dispute with the Soviet Union could complicate troop movements, prisoner recovery, and the administration of occupied Germany. Eisenhower's style is controlled and pragmatic. He knows that in coalition warfare, even a small crack can widen quickly once the war's pressure is removed. Stalin's approach reflects a deeper habit of Soviet statecraft, secrecy as a weapon. By allowing rumors to circulate that Hitler might have escaped, Stalin increases uncertainty inside Germany and abroad. It forces Western intelligence agencies to spend resources chasing possibilities. It also helps Stalin argue that remaining Nazi elements could still be dangerous, justifying harsh security measures across occupied territory. This tactic works because it targets a real vulnerability. In 1945, communications were imperfect, documents were missing, and countless people were displaced. In that environment, a rumor can live longer than a verified fact. Stalin understands that the West will be cautious about dismissing the possibility of escape because the political cost of being wrong is enormous. If Hitler had survived, every Allied promise of victory and justice would look careless. This is not simply paranoia on Stalin's part, it is strategic manipulation. He is shaping the post-war battlefield before the Cold War has a name. Stalin does not need Hitler to be alive for Hitler's ghost to serve Soviet interests. He only needs the Western Allies to hesitate and second guess. Churchill reads the situation as a warning. In his mind, an ally who withholds critical information is preparing for a different kind of struggle. The British government's resources are strained, and Churchill's leverage is shrinking compared to the United States and the Soviet Union. Yet he still pushes to understand Soviet intentions because he sees what is coming, a Europe divided by lines that armies have already drawn. What if Churchill decides that Stalin's uncertainty campaign is a deliberate move and begins planning Western defenses before the occupation lines harden into permanent borders? Eisenhower, meanwhile, focuses on the immediate problem of ending the war cleanly. Germany's military surrenders in stages and the logistics of disarming millions of soldiers require cooperation, not confrontation. His strategic discipline is to avoid unnecessary provocation while securing American objectives. But he also knows that once victory is complete, political unity will weaken fast. By the end of this phase, the world has entered a new kind of conflict without formally declaring it. Hitler is dead, but Stalin is still fighting for advantage. The battlefield has moved from streets and bunkers to reports, statements, and controlled facts. The war's final secret is no longer about who died. It is about who gets to define what the death means. Germany collapses into surrender, but the ground reality across Europe is not relief. It is administration under pressure. Millions of soldiers are disarmed. Prisoners of war are gathered and transported. Displaced civilians move through ruined towns with no clear place to return to. In cities like Berlin, basic services are shattered. Water systems are broken. Food supplies are limited, and local authority is either absent or distrusted. Occupation is not a clean victory parade. It is a daily struggle to prevent chaos from turning into another kind of killing. Joseph Stalin moves quickly to ensure the Soviet Union's military success becomes political permanence. The Red Army occupies territory that stretches across Eastern Europe, and Stalin's key objective is security through control. He does not view this as expansion for its own sake. He views it as the only guarantee that the Soviet Union will never again face an invasion like the one launched by Hitler in 1941. That fear, grounded in real experience, shapes Soviet policy with relentless force. Stalin's administration in the East is systematic. Political structures are rebuilt under Soviet supervision. Friendly parties are strengthened. Opponents are neutralized. In many areas, the language used is liberation, but the methods resemble domination. The Soviet Union has paid a catastrophic price in the war, and Stalin believes payment entitles him to shape the outcome. For him, this is not a negotiation between equals. It is the settlement enforced by the army that bled the most. In the West, Churchill watches Soviet behavior harden into a pattern. He has seen the temporary cooperation that war demands, and now he sees the strategic competition that peace exposes. British power is strained, but Churchill's warnings grow sharper because he recognizes an emerging reality. The Soviet Union is not preparing to share Europe, it is preparing to hold it. Eisenhower represents a different American approach. His focus is on stabilization and the practical requirements of occupation. He understands that American troops cannot remain indefinitely everywhere, and he also understands that the United States will soon face political pressure to bring soldiers home. His strategic instinct is to avoid unnecessary confrontation while building the structures that can keep Germany from collapsing into lawlessness. But he cannot ignore what Soviet control means for the balance of power. The question of Hitler's death fades in the public mind, but its consequences remain active. The end of Hitler does not end the apparatus of security, propaganda, and control that different states have built during the war. Those tools do not disappear when the enemy disappears. They get redirected. Stalin's decision to manage the truth in 1945 fits into this larger story. If a government can control the facts of victory, it can shape the fears of the next decade. The post-war settlement becomes a series of compromises made under pressure. Germany is divided into zones. Berlin is partitioned even though it sits deep inside Soviet territory. Economic systems begin to separate along political lines. Former allies begin to interpret the same actions as threats. The change is not sudden, it is gradual, and it is driven by decisions that leaders justify as defensive. For Stalin, the war's ending confirms his belief that power must be consolidated, not relaxed. For Churchill, it confirms that the fight against tyranny did not automatically produce freedom everywhere. For Eisenhower, it confirms that successful coalition warfare does not guarantee a stable peace. These men do not all want the same future, and they do not trust one another to protect it. Hitler's death closes one chapter of history, but it does not cleanse Europe of the conditions that created him. The destruction of the war leaves societies exhausted, armed, and uncertain. Stalin understands that uncertainty favors the side willing to impose order. He intends to be that side, and he has the army to prove it. The world remembers the end of World War II as a moment of triumph. For the people living through it, the triumph is real, but it is incomplete. The bodies are still being counted, the prisons are still full, the borders are still moving, and the next conflict is already taking shape in meetings, checkpoints, and controlled narratives.